Welcome to this deep dive, and today we're going to be tackling someone who left a really big mark on 19th century thought, John Stuart Mill.
Yeah, a figure whose ideas, I think it's safe to say, continue to really resonate in philosophical circles even today.
Yeah, you bet. And you've provided us with some excerpts from the Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy's entry on Mill.
Which is great because it really gives us a chance to get into the details.
He does, yeah. It's like having this sort of like philosophical roadmap to guide us through his ideas.
Yeah, through the complex landscape of Mill's thought,
Exactly. And so we're going to be exploring a few things: his life,
his life.
his really interesting commitment to naturalism,
Yes.
and the core tenets of both his theoretical and practical philosophies.
And I think since we're talking to philosophers here, we can really get into the nitty-gritty of the concepts, the arguments,
Yeah.
all that good stuff.
For sure, for sure. So I think before we get into like the real like system
Yeah.
of Mill's thought, I think it's helpful to start with the man himself.
Yeah.
His life story is anything but ordinary.
Oh, yeah. It's almost like a novel. Just imagine being subjected to this intense and I think some might even say force-fed education by your father, who was a very close ally of Jeremy Bentham.
Yeah, talk about high expectations, starting Greek at age 3.
It's just remarkable.
It boggles the mind.
It does.
And this upbringing had a huge impact on him, right?
Yeah.
Shaped his early intellectual development. But then at age 20, he has this huge mental crisis.
Right. A period of, disillusionment and doubt where he starts to question the foundation of the very utilitarian philosophy that he was brought up in.
Yeah, it's like the weight of his intellectual inheritance just kind of caused this implosion.
Yeah, and it's really interesting here. What happens is he doesn't completely reject his upbringing, but he starts to incorporate romantic thought
Oh, wow.
alongside these Enlightenment ideals that he had, in his early education.
So he's not just reacting against it, but trying to find a synthesis.
Exactly, yeah, finding a synthesis.
That's so interesting.
Yeah, he finds inspiration in thinkers like Wordsworth and Coleridge.
Okay.
And he's discovering the importance of emotion, imagination, the complexities of human experience.
Yeah.
Things that he felt were kind of neglected by the rationalistic,
Right.
systematic approach of Bentham and his father.
Yeah, it's like he's realizing there's more to life than just cold, hard logic.
That's right. And this kind of broadening of perspective, I think, is so crucial for understanding the development of his more mature philosophical system, because he's trying to bridge this gap that he sees as very artificial between reason and feeling,
Right.
and recognizing that both are vital for a truly fulfilling human life.
That's a really good point. And I think it helps to separate him from these stereotypical portrayals of utilitarians as just being these.
The cold calculators of pleasure and pain.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So he is concerned with human happiness, but he sees it as complex,
Yeah.
not reducible to just this hedonistic calculus.
Absolutely. And it's also fascinating to think about how his rather unconventional relationship with Harriet Taylor at the time, kind of scandalous,
Right.
might have contributed to his understanding of human experience.
I would imagine.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, their intellectual partnership was so important and likely played a role in his later work on women's rights,
Yeah.
pushing him to challenge these social norms and advocate for greater equality.
That's remarkable. And it's remarkable to think that all this intellectual ferment is happening while he's holding down a really demanding job
Oh, yeah.
at the East India Company and then later becoming a member of parliament.
It's really a testament to his work ethic
Wow.
and his engagement with the practical world.
Yeah, he's not just an armchair philosopher.
No,
He's out there trying to shape policy and make changes.
absolutely. And this brings us to, I think, one of the real core principles that kind of underpins his whole philosophical project, naturalism.
Okay, so let's unpack that a little bit for Mill. What does naturalism mean?
Yeah. For Mill, naturalism is the idea that human beings are wholly part of nature,
Okay.
not separate from it, not governed by some sort of supernatural realm.
So no Cartesian dualism where the mind and body are separate.
No, not at all.
Okay.
The mind is just as much a part of the natural world as the body, mental phenomena are subject to natural laws
Okay.
and can be studied empirically, just like physical phenomena.
This has some pretty radical implications for how he approaches knowledge and morality, I would imagine.
Absolutely. So this thoroughgoing naturalism leads him to reject a priori knowledge.
Okay.
So no innate ideas, no truths that are accessible just through introspection or pure reason.
So everything that we know is derived from experience?
Exactly. All knowledge, even, seemingly abstract concepts like causality or even mathematical truths,
Wow.
are ultimately based on our interactions with the world.
So how do we go from these really simple sense experiences to complex ideas and systems of knowledge?
But that's where his associationist psychology comes in. So the idea is that even our most complex ideas are built up from these simpler sense impressions that get linked together in our minds through repeated associations.
So kind of like building
Yeah,
blocks,
like building blocks.
where the blocks are individual experiences and the structure is our conceptual framework.
Exactly. That's a great analogy. And he uses this to explain even abstract concepts like our belief in the infinity of space.
How does that work? Because that seems like that would have to be innate. You can't possibly experience infinity.
Right, but he argues that we arrive at this concept of infinity not through some special intuition, but through the constant experience of encountering more space beyond whatever boundary we perceive.
So it's like a generalization based on a pattern in our experience.
Precisely not some innate idea that's just implanted in our
I
minds.
see. Okay, so this emphasis on experience as the foundation of knowledge is going to be huge for understanding his views on logic and science
Absolutely.
and the limits of understanding.
It is.
It sounds like we're about to dive into some deep philosophical waters.
Oh, yeah.
Are you ready?
I'm ready. Let's explore how this naturalism shapes his views on language logic and the very nature of scientific inquiry. Picking up where we left off, I think it's time to move on to Mill's theoretical philosophy,
Okay.
particularly his work on language and logic, which might seem a little dry at first, but I promise it gets really interesting.
Well, as a philosopher, I'm always down for a deep dive into the foundations of knowledge. I mean, language and logic are like the tools we use to think, so understanding how they work is pretty crucial.
Exactly. And Mill, as you might expect, approaches this with his characteristic rigor and attention to detail. He starts by making this really important distinction between the denotation and connotation of words.
Okay, break that down for me, because I vaguely remember those terms from logic class, but a refresher would be great.
Sure. So the denotation of a word is basically what it refers to, the object or class of objects it picks out in the world. Think of it like a label.
Okay.
So, for example, the word philosopher denotes all those individuals who engage in philosophical inquiry, including you, me, Socrates, the whole gang.
Right, they're pointing to someone and saying, that's a philosopher. It's about identifying a specific thing or category.
Exactly. Now, connotation is a bit more subtle. It refers to the attributes or qualities that a word implies the characteristics associated with it.
Okay.
So philosopher might connote things like deep thinking, a love of wisdom, maybe a tendency toward, existential angst, the usual stereotypes.
Right, so denotation is like the who or the what, and connotation is more like the what's it like.
You got it. And Mill argues that this distinction is really key to understanding the meaning of propositions, those basic building blocks of language that assert something about the world.
Because a proposition like all philosophers are mortal is making a claim about the properties of the class of things denoted by the word philosopher.
Precisely, but a proposition like Socrates is Socrates, well, that doesn't really tell us anything substantive about Socrates himself.
Right, it's just true by definition.
It's a tautology, and this leads him to critique traditional syllogistic logic. Because he argues that since the conclusion of a valid syllogism is already contained in the premises, deductive reasoning doesn't actually generate new knowledge about the world.
It's like rearranging the furniture in a room. You're not adding anything new, just changing the configuration of what's already there.
A perfect analogy, and this is what leads him to champion inductive reasoning as the primary source of genuine knowledge.
Okay.
For Mill, induction is where the real action is, both scientifically and philosophically.
Because it's through induction that we discover new patterns, make connections, expand our understanding of how the world works.
Exactly. Think about scientific discovery. It's not about deducing facts from first principles. It's about carefully observing, gathering data, formulating hypotheses based on those observations, and even mathematics, which is often seen as the realm of pure deduction, is ultimately grounded in inductive reasoning, according to Mill.
Wait, really, math? How does that work? I mean, math seems like the epitome of deductive logic.
Well, consider how we arrive at even basic mathematical truths, like 2 + 1, 3. It's not because we have some innate grasp of these numbers, but because every time we've combined two things with one more thing we've observed, that we end up with three things.
So it's a generalization based on repeated observations, just like any other empirical law.
Exactly. And Mill outlines these canons of induction methods for isolating causes and discovering those laws that govern natural phenomena.
Okay.
They're not foolproof, but they provide this really robust framework for scientific investigation.
So he's providing us with a set of tools, a methodology for systematically investigating the world and drawing reliable inferences from our observations.
Right, and he firmly believes that through this process we can uncover the real structure of the world.
Oh, yeah.
He's a scientific realist in that sense. But at the same time, he also acknowledges what he calls the relativity of human knowledge.
Which is the idea that we only ever know the world as it appears to us, filtered through our senses and our cognitive apparatus.
Precisely, and this leads him to some pretty intriguing and potentially controversial conclusions about the limits of human knowledge. He even starts to move towards a kind of idealism,
Oh, wow.
suggesting that ultimately we can only be certain of the existence of our own mental impressions.
So is he saying that the external world might not even exist?
Not quite. Remember, he sees the mind as part of nature, so our mental impressions are still natural phenomena, but he does raise this very provocative question. If all we can ever directly access are our own sensations, how can we be sure there's a mind-independent reality out there causing those sensations?
It's like we're trapped inside our own heads, forever separated from the thing in itself, to use Kantian terminology.
Yes, and this leads him to his famous definition of matter as a permanent possibility of sensation.
Okay.
Essentially, we can only be sure of the potential for experiencing the world, not of the world itself existing independently of our minds.
Okay, I'm going to need a minute to process that. It's a pretty mind-bending concept.
It is, and it really highlights those challenges of reconciling a commitment to empiricism with the realization that our access to the world is always mediated by our own perceptual and cognitive faculties.
So how does Mill navigate this tension between his belief in the power of empirical inquiry and his acknowledgement of the limitations of human knowledge?
That's a great question, and one that we'll have to explore further when we delve into his views on utilitarianism and his passionate defense of individual liberty on liberty.
Okay, so we've been really digging into Mill's naturalism, how it shapes his views on knowledge and language and science. It's just fascinating how he tries to base everything on experience
Yeah, it really is.
while recognizing that our senses have limitations.
Absolutely. And this tension that you're pointing out between wanting objective knowledge and knowing that we're always seeing the world through our own subjective lens, it runs through all of his work.
Yeah, it does. It really does.
And I think it informs even his practical philosophy,
Right.
his utilitarianism, and his arguments for individual liberty.
It's like he's constantly wrestling with this problem of how to reconcile our desire for certainty with the messy reality of human experience.
Exactly. And that's what makes him so relevant for us as philosophers today, because we're still grappling with these same questions, especially in an age of information overload, where it's even harder to separate truth from falsehood.
Oh, yeah. I mean, think about Mill's concerns about the tyranny of the majority.
Right.
He was writing way back in the 19th century,
Long before social media.
long before the internet, yet his warnings about the stifling power of social conformity seem so relevant today.
It's like he could foresee the dangers of cancel culture or these echo chambers we find ourselves in online where dissenting voices are often shut down.
And this is where his defense of free speech becomes so important.
Absolutely.
He understood that silencing unpopular or even offensive ideas ultimately undermines the foundations of a free and intellectually vibrant society.
Yeah, for Mill, the pursuit of truth requires constant challenge and debate, a willingness to confront different viewpoints.
You have to be able to have those hard conversations.
You do suppressing dissent, even if it's misguided or harmful, leads to intellectual stagnation and a sort of moral complacency.
It's like he's saying that the best way to combat bad ideas is not with censorship, but with better ideas.
Yeah, more speech, more dialogue, more chances for the truth to come out through that messy but essential process of open discourse.
Exactly. And this commitment to open inquiry extends to what he calls experiments of living.
Right.
He believes that individuals should be free to choose their own paths in life, to develop their own personalities and lifestyles, even if those choices go against prevailing social norms.
It's his emphasis on individuality and nonconformity really shining through here.
Yeah.
He's very suspicious of any attempts to impose one single standard of behavior or belief.
Because diversity of thought and action are essential
Absolutely essential.
for both individual flourishing and societal progress.
He even argues that society benefits from eccentrics and nonconformists, those who challenge the status quo.
They shake things up.
They inject a healthy dose of disruption into the system, prevent us from becoming too complacent or set in our ways.
Okay, so this brings us to utilitarianism,
Hmm.
his probably most famous and maybe most controversial idea.
And it's so important to remember that for Mill, utilitarianism isn't just this abstract ethical theory.
Right?
It's a guide for living,
Right.
a framework for making choices that lead to the greatest happiness for the greatest number of people.
So it's about maximizing happiness and minimizing suffering. But it's not as simple as just calculating pleasure, like some people might think.
Right. Mill is very aware of the complexities of human nature and all the different forms that happiness can take. He distinguishes between higher and lower pleasures, arguing that intellectual, imaginative, and moral pleasures are more fulfilling than just physical gratification.
Yeah, it's that classic better to be Socrates dissatisfied than a fool satisfied argument.
Exactly. He's recognizing that there's a qualitative aspect to happiness, not
Yeah.
just a quantitative one.
And that qualitative aspect is key to understanding his defense of individual liberty. On liberty.
Absolutely.
He argues that respecting individual autonomy and allowing for lots of different lifestyles will ultimately lead to a happier and more prosperous society.
Because it lets individuals reach their full potential to pursue their own ideas of a good life and to contribute their unique talents to the common good.
And that leads us to his famous harm principle.
Yeah.
The idea that we should only restrict someone's liberty to stop them from harming others.
Right. So no paternalistic laws that try to protect people from themselves
Okay.
or enforce some kind of morality that's not about preventing harm.
So people should be free to make their own choices,
Yeah.
even if they seem foolish, as long as they're not hurting anyone else.
Exactly. It's a radical notion in many ways and one that's still debated today.
Yeah.
But it shows Mill's deep commitment to individual autonomy.
He really believed that we are the best judges of our own good.
He did. And while he recognizes the need for some limits on freedom, he's always cautious about expanding state power
Yeah.
or imposing one single vision of the good life.
Which is so relevant today with all the new challenges to individual liberty we face from both governments and corporations. I mean, Mill's work reminds us how important it is to be vigilant and defend those freedoms.
And that defense requires not just abstract principles, but practical ways to protect individual rights.
Right.
This is where Mill's support for things like proportional representation and a strong system of checks and balances comes in.
So he wasn't just a theorist,
No.
but a political reformer as well, trying to build systems that protect individual liberty and promote the common good.
Exactly. And while some of his specific ideas might seem outdated, now the spirit of his work, his commitment to reason, individual liberty, and the search for truth,
Yeah.
that remains so relevant and inspiring.
So as we wrap up this deep dive into the world of John Stuart Mill, what are some of the big takeaways that we can take with us as philosophers?
Well, one key takeaway, I think, is the importance of grounding our beliefs and experience, but also remembering the limits of our senses
Yeah.
and the need for critical reflection.
It's like he's telling us to be both empirical and skeptical,
Right.
to test our ideas, but also be open to changing them.
Exactly. Another takeaway is his unwavering belief in the power of reason to solve problems, to make our lives better, and to create a more just society.
It's a powerful reminder that we shouldn't give up on truth and progress.
And, of course, his defense of individual liberty, free speech, and open inquiry, that's a powerful reminder of the values that are crucial for a thriving society.
So as we navigate the complexities of our own time, let's keep in mind those lessons from John Stuart Mill: to embrace reason, defend liberty, challenge dogma, and never stop questioning and exploring.
That's a great way to put it. It's been a pleasure exploring these ideas with you.
It's been great talking with you too. Until next time, keep questioning, keep thinking, and keep that spirit of philosophical inquiry alive.